If you can stay positive and just kind of start to find your niche in the world, I think that's what I'd recommend.
Welcome, everyone, to the Sports Business Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. We're joined by Seth Anderson. Seth, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tanvir. Excited to be here.
So Seth is a director at Telus who literally worked his way up the corporate ladder, and also a junior or GM for a junior hockey league that you've really turned around over the past few years that you've been there. So lots of great things to dive into in this podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here, excited to share some of my career journey and how sports, being involved in sports has influenced my business career, and dive right into it.
It's awesome. That's what it's about. So Seth, for everyone watching, listening, what are you doing right now? What's keeping you busy?
Got a few things on the go. We recently moved just as part of COVID. Kind of learned that working from home opened up some doors to maybe live in a place we'd never thought about living previously. So we made a move out to the Bragg Creek area, which for those of you listening who know anything about the Calgary area, kind of in the foothills of the mountains. So very, very beautiful area, and just got a chance to take my kids and get them out into the country and experience nature and a little bit slower pace. So, we've been settling into our new place, and I'd say the other thing that's been keeping me busy, beyond kids and a day job, is started up my own podcast, which is, kind of how our paths ended up crossing.
It's awesome. So, as a question for you on the move, do you think, so I mean, there's always a silver lining, right? Whenever something bad happens, pandemic is bad. The silver lining is people such as yourself have been able to go and live in places you never dreamed of before. I myself moved countries. I'm remote. Everything's still going on. So what are your thoughts on the silver lining in this pandemic when it ends?
It's interesting. I don't want to downplay the challenges of the pandemic, because certainly, a lot of people have not had a situation like mine. But for us, it's been largely positive in many ways. So obviously the move being one of those things, and honestly, we would have never thought of moving out here had it not been for the pandemic, and it just opened your eyes to what's possible. So that's one for sure. Another thing that I've thought about a lot is the reinvestment of time from commuting back and forth into the city every day. And, you could have looked at that as an opportunity to sleep a little bit longer, or maybe get up in your pajamas and saunter over to the computer and just start your day of work. And I didn't take it that way. I took it very much as, an opportunity to invest that time into personal wellness. And I've really doubled down on that. So I think last year we also got a puppy, and I think him and I walked. It was well over 1,000 kilometers, because every morning we were out getting in, 5K or whatever. So that's getting that time and doing something with it has been huge, and it's actually set some habits, I think, that are going to stay with me for the rest of my life.
That's great. The way you have been able to not sleep in, I think it takes dedication, and I'm sure we get into that, but I think a lot of the principles from sports that a lot of great athletes and teams embody is exactly that, is being disciplined. So just because a circumstance changed doesn't mean that you have to throw in the towel. So, you've actually spent, and you're right, 30 minutes in the morning, maybe 30 minutes in the evening, maybe longer. Now, if you can spend that 1 hour on something different, whether it's wellness, whether it's reading a book, whether it's something for yourself, that is 7 hours a week or 5 hours in a working day or working week. That's huge. If you keep doing that one thing, those 5 hours a week for the next 1 year, of course, you're going to get better at it. But I think most people don't see it that way.
Yeah. And, can't speak for most people, but that's 100% right. If I think back to, the old me and some of the things that I've been through, I didn't have a lot of personal discipline. And that's been probably the biggest change. And, you think about sleeping in, that sounds so good. But one of the motivators for me, it was just sort of randomly, I was watching some interview or something on Instagram about The Rock, and I think he wakes up at like 2 a.m. I'm not quite that crazy, but I was like, you know what, I'm just going to start getting up early, and I started getting up at 5 a.m. and finding that time to read. Like this year, I've probably read 6 books
Already.
And we're in March. Yeah. Cause I get
Oh,
up and I
wow.
read for 30, 40 minutes every morning, and
There you go.
you start to build a routine. And one thing I tell people, it's funny because we used to have things to look forward to, like vacation, right? It would be like, oh, 3 more weeks and I'm on vacation, can't wait. And you kind of like mentally put yourself there. I've actually found, and it's going to sound crazy, but I get like a little variation of that feeling at night when I go to bed because I'm so excited about my routine in the morning. And it's not one of those routines where I have to do the same thing. I shake it up a little bit, but
Yeah.
getting that mental wellness in there, getting that physical fitness, like all that stuff, I look forward to it, and it makes every day that much better.
That's a great point. Vacations, I always hear people say, hey, thank God it's Friday. I think that's the worst thing you can say because that means that you just wasted your entire week. Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you don't want to just say, hey, my life sucks for the next 3 weeks until I'm on vacation. I think you're absolutely right. It's the small things you do in every single day that make you appreciate life, such as make up in the morning. For me, it used to be breaking my fast every morning because I had intermittent fasting. I was like, I can't wait to have that protein shake, right? So it's
Yeah.
the small things.
Yeah. Those small things add up though. Like you said, you don't think about a half an hour here or there, but you add it up
Yeah.
at the end of a year. It's a big number.
Yeah. Or if you're 30 minutes scrolling Instagram every day, that's going to add a toll as well.
Or binging
Yeah.
Netflix or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Seth, so let's take a step back in memory lane. Walk me through your early childhood and your connection to sports and how that influenced your career.
Yeah, I've always been a pretty big sports fan. My first sports memory is the Joe Carter home run, which obviously resonates with most Canadians, I think, if you're any kind of sports
Mm-hmm.
fan. And I just remember my dad jumping up and down and kind of thinking this is pretty cool. So that was sort of my foray into sports. And a story I like to tell is, or my mom likes to tell, is while most kids were dreaming of playing in the NHL or being a professional athlete, it's not that I didn't want that, but I was more likely to be out in the yard creating a roster or a list and building a team than
Maybe playing, yeah.
maybe playing. So I've always sort of had um, you know, uh, this is another sort of funny thing. Before there was Trade Center, for example, in the yellow pages, there used to be a phone line that you could call, and it was for hockey transactions.
Oh,
So
wow.
there would be like a automated message on the other end, and it would just read you all of the hockey transactions that had occurred. So
All the
on
free
like
agent trades, all that
free
stuff.
agent trades, all that stuff, and I might have been the only person phoning it. I don't know, but I would phone it like 3 times a day, um, and I'm like a 12-year-old kid. So that was what I was into.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So then how do you get into this career path? I know you started um, a corporate career in a different role than you are now. So walk me through that progression.
Yeah, well, and it's very much interlocked with sport. So when I started my day job, I got into the telecommunications industry. I'd spent my entire career up to that point in a variety of sort of labor type roles. I had a high school degree. I went to college for a semester and did general studies, and honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I just kind of started working, and that led me to the telecommunications industry, which I thought would be a good stable career, benefits, pension, stable hours. Those were all things I'd never had before, and so I jumped into that, and sort of all within a year, went into that. My son, we got pregnant with who ended up being my son, Lyndon, and I also volunteered to start general managing junior B hockey team. So it was a pretty sort of transformational time in my life around that 2011
Mm-hmm.
range.
About 10 years ago. Yep.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, exactly. And when I got into the corporate world, I didn't know honestly what a director was or a manager was. I just like I had no aspirations to become a president or do any of that because I didn't even know what it was. I just knew sort of like trades and working and showing up and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So what got me into leadership, I would say, was on the hockey front and getting into the GM role, and starting to get exposed to what leadership was, building teams, influencing people, going and getting sponsorships. All these things were sort of happening as like a side gig, you would say. And it all kind of came together when I met my general manager at, in my day job. And he was also a hockey guy. And so we had this connection because I was doing
Oh,
the,
it's
the junior
amazing.
hockey thing. He
Yeah.
played junior hockey. And so anyway, I ended up sitting in as an acting manager and got an opportunity to kind of, dip my toe in the leadership pool, if you will, and had some success. And I was learning so much from what I was doing in the hockey world and applying that back to business and sort of just had this really nice synergy between the two things, being a, rookie leader basically. And so that's kind of where it all started, and it just kind of it grew from there. And the things that I learned, whether it was building business cases, like I said, building teams, all the things that go into running a hockey team, I was able to take those lessons and learnings. It was almost like a mini MBA in a lot of ways, right? Like it was like a very
Mm-hmm.
specific case study of how to build an organization from the ground up, and then take all that leadership,
And then apply
all
it.
those lessons, apply it to business. And it led to me getting sort of 3 promotions in 3 years, which I tell you right now, I never would have gotten without that hockey experience.
That is, it's funny. That's exactly 3 years from me as well. And I look back, I would never have gotten those if it wasn't for football. It's crazy.
It's
It's
funny,
crazy.
but
Nothing
it's
to do with
true.
sports.
Yeah.
Maybe business has nothing to do with sports, tech, food for my space, telecommunications for you. But the impact that sports has had on your career and mine and others that I've spoken to this podcast, it's crazy how big of an impact it makes in business.
It does. And I mean, when you can start to think of it that way, right? Like when you can separate yourself from the game, because it can go the other way sometimes, I think, if you get, some things that may work in a hockey arena or a football stadium, maybe aren't going to work in a business setting.
The office linebacker. Remember that?
Yes.
Ted Cruz just tackling everyone.
Yeah. Tackling, cross check. Some of that stuff's not going to fly.
Yeah.
But when it comes to one thing I think of, like controlling your emotions and understanding. Here's an interesting one: is understanding where the play is going to go. I mean, you can see it happening and developing in the business world all the time, right? Like this is going to go bad. Like this person's going to pass to that person. They don't know how to catch the pass, and we're going to have a cluster over here. You can start to read the business world very much like that once you can kind of separate yourself from it, if that makes sense. Like you got to be able to kind of understand the principles behind what's happening.
I was chatting with a few others, and I think it was TJ Gagliardi, and he said hockey's all about reading, and so is business. It's not that the players are all in the offenses. If you can read and react faster than somebody else, you're going to make better plays. And that's business. You're reacting to external forces, you're reacting to internal pressures, you're reacting to competitors. It doesn't matter how good a strategy you have, you always have to react. So I think your point is bang on.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the fundamental rules of sport, when you're passing, I just go back to passing. My head is kind of stuck there right now. You're not passing to where the person is, you're passing to where they're going to be. Right. And, in the business world, if you can be that one step ahead, that can give you such a huge advantage.
What did you learn from hockey for your personal development that allowed you to accelerate your growth in corporate versus others? What was that specifically at an individual level?
Yeah, I think for me, two things come to mind. One is resilience and adapting. Those kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And I think, my hockey playing career was very short. I played a little bit of every sport. I played hockey for a few years. I played baseball. I played football. I played basketball. I did all of that. And I was pretty young. So I don't know that I could probably conjure up something. But when I think about my hockey coaching and managing and scouting experience, you just have to be able to put things behind you, and you have to do it very quickly, because if you're standing there feeling sorry for yourself,
no one cares.
Nobody cares, and nobody's waiting, right? Like you got to keep your eye on the prize. You got to know what your next move is going to be, and you just got to be able to put things out of your head and keep moving forward. And that mental agility is as important, if not more important, in the business world. Because if you're taking things personally, or you're getting worked up about what other people think or are saying, you can very easily just end up not doing anything in a day because you're so worried about all this other stuff. Whereas if you can stay
Yeah.
focused, if you can stay locked in on what it is you need to do and let all that stuff sort of off to the side, I find that's probably the one of the biggest things that I've taken from sport and applied to business.
I always like to call it putting on your headphones.
Yeah.
I was actually doing a keynote last week, and somebody asked a question. They said, "How did an example that I shared from my career? Like, how did your team manage to launch the technology, whatever the products are, despite all the issues?" Right? I'm like, "To put your headphones on," and that's a term that I took from football. Our coach would say, "It doesn't matter what the people out there say. Put on your headphones. All that matters is what you do on the field."
Yeah.
Exactly what you're saying, right? It's
No, I love that analogy. And, it's interesting. You talk about implementing change and, especially technological change. And, if people are starting to get worked up, one thing I've noticed, especially if you have a lot of people that are upset about something you're doing, or they're making a lot of noise about something, you're probably onto something, honestly. Like, you're
people hate change. Simple.
right. But if you're doing something that's impacting others to such a point that it's eliciting a reaction, sometimes it's good to take a pause and be like, okay, well, what is it, and how do I do more of that? Because we're on to something here. Innovation and, changing the game, as it were, those things don't happen sitting on the sidelines.
And I think for everyone listening and watching, Seth, you hit on a really good point. If you are trying to move the needle and there is a disruption happening, people are talking, that means you're onto something. So this is absolutely something you should take away if you're listening and watching right now, because that this is what it's about. And don't stop. That's when you got to keep pushing.
Well, and that can be a natural feeling for people, right? Oh,
Mm.
people are upset, I gotta stop, I gotta, like, but that's the point where you want to keep going. And obviously you need to be respectful and, fair process and hear people out and engage with people 100%. But
Yeah.
what's causing that reaction, and figure that out, and keep going. That would be my biggest advice.
What kind of change did you bring on the hockey side as you were the GM for this team? And how, I know you talked about building your team. So walk me through that, Seth.
Yeah, and it's a few years ago, because, when we
Yeah.
moved, 5, 6 years ago, and it's been amazing to see what the team has accomplished since I left. They've really, Adam Huxley's done a phenomenal job of solidifying a bona fide program there that develops hockey players and young men, which was the goal all along, right? Like, I just wanted to create, or not even help create, a hockey institution, right? That was bigger than hockey, that engaged the community, that gave players an opportunity to develop and take the next step in their life, whether that was with another team at another level, or even just personally. Like, in some cases, this was the highest level of hockey they were ever going to play. And that's great, but they could still come and have fun and win and learn something, and hopefully take whatever it is they learned, apply it to their family, apply it to their business life, whatever that sort of looks like, or pay it back to their kids and coaching in the future. That was really the goal. My experience playing hockey was not great. I was 5-kid family. Mom didn't drive. Dad was always working. So I wasn't able to be as committed as I liked. I didn't have the best equipment, and that it just wasn't a great experience. And so I left the hockey world at a pretty young age, sort of bitter. And one of the goals I had was to make it fun. Like, I wanted to go and I wanted to have fun, and I wanted the people on the team to have fun, but also have that foundation of hard work that would lead to success and all those other good things. And so that's a lot of what we did. And I'm not going to say that it was perfect. And, there was a lot of failure along the way, and some things that maybe I'd do differently looking back on it now. But we had a lot of fun, we had a lot of success, and we created the foundation, for the team to go on and win multiple provincials and Western championships and league championships. So I'll always be proud of that, and thankful for the opportunity. And one thing that I when I look back on it, and this is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life. And, there's been a few, but I remember we were in the league finals, and it was our third consecutive year being in the league finals. And we were playing the Cold Lake Ice, and they had won 4 straight league championships at that point. And we had beaten them, I want to say 3 games to 1 in the regular season series. And we had a great regular season. We went 33-2-1. I was, I was coaching that year along with Adam Huxley, who I mentioned previously. We had a really great team. We had a really great team. We won. We went 8-0 in the playoffs, and then to get to the finals, and then we were up 1-0. And I remember saying to my assistant GM at the time, "There's no way we're going to lose more times in the next week and a half than we've lost in the 7 months up till now. There's no way. Like, we got it. We're good." I was so confident in our team, and I thoroughly believed with every piece of my being that we were going to win the league championship that year. And I already knew at that point that I was moving. I'd gotten my promotion, and this was it. This was my last dance with the team. The best of 7. We're up 1-0. At that point, we're like 42-1 on the year if you include playoffs. And we lost 4 of the next 5 games. And it's so hard to like look back on that sometimes still. And I mean, we're not talking NHL Stanley Cup here. We're talking junior B hockey in Wainwright, Alberta. But I remember the feeling going back into the dressing room, and there's 21 kids in there, and everybody's kind of crying, and we're all just like can't even believe what happened, and all the existential circumstances that happened that whether they were totally fair or legit doesn't matter. We didn't win. And I just remember feeling so like I failed them, right? Like I just didn't come through when it counted. And all those things you tell yourself, like, oh, I didn't play hockey at the highest level, so therefore I don't know as much and I can't be a great coach. Like all those things that you kind of tell yourself when you're just negative self-talk, right? And it all just came to be, and it didn't really have anything to do with that. It was just at the end of the day, they had a hot goalie and we couldn't put the puck in the net, and we didn't do what we needed to do. And I just remember that feeling like I failed the team, and it took me a long time to get over that. And now, 5-6 years down the road, I can look back on it and go like, I learned so much from that. Like, don't get overconfident. You gotta stay focused on the details, and you gotta keep everybody kind of grounded. Like when things get tough, how are you going to respond? Like what are you going to do? What are the bad habits that you're going to default to? Because that I think that applies in life or business, right? If you have a traumatic event in your personal life, if something doesn't go the way you plan at work, sports, if things start to go sideways, if you don't have a lot of personal discipline, or you've got some bad habits, or you've got some poor team dynamics or miscommunication, those things are going to get amplified. So the more you can work on those things when the times are good, and make sure that you've got that good communication, you've got that two-way respect, you've got good habits in place, the more easier it'll be to navigate through those storms, I think.
You blamed yourself for the loss for a while. I think that's a great lesson, because you're right. Like, it's nothing to do with the coach. You can't blame it on one person, right? We know that, and I think you know that now. But you bring up a great point that I want to dive into, Seth, is leaders work for their teams, right? So you worked for your hockey team. They didn't report into you, and same in business. So when the team lost, you felt that it was you that failed them. Now, there's some coaches out there, there's some managers out there, leaders out there that we all know, that when something goes wrong, will point fingers at the team. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about having accountability. And if you are leading something, it doesn't matter if somebody reporting into you is not good. At the end of the day, I think it's the coach's responsibility and the ownership, right?
100%. I'm a big believer in servant-based leadership as well. I'm not into hierarchies and you work for me and all that kind of stuff. I want to understand, how can I help? How can I get you the tools, the information, the support you need to go, whether it's into, an arena or into the business arena, if you will, and be successful. What roadblocks can I remove? How can I set you up for success? And to me, as a leader, if you haven't created the space, right? Create the space where people can be open and honest and transparent and surface issues. Like, that's your first responsibility. And then two, giving them the tools or the training or the information that they need to be successful. If you can check those two boxes and say, you know what, we've done everything we can do to create the space. You have everything you need to be successful. And now we're in a position where it's more of a will thing or a bad attitude. That's one thing. But often I find people don't spend enough time on those first two elements, and they just jump straight to, you know what, you're not a fit here, or we're going to micromanage you because, whatever the reason might be. And so for me, it's been a lot about, how do you create the space, and then how do you give people the tools they need to be successful?
I always bring the analogy that it's the off season that you win the championship in, right? That's the most important part. And I think you are seeing the same thing. It's the foundational work, right? The building the safe space, building the understanding with the team. If that's not there, you cannot be successful in business.
Well, and you look at, some of the franchises that have been successful over the years. I'll take the Toronto Raptors as a recent example. And, yeah, they made the big trade for Kawhi, but they had the foundation in place. They had consistency of leadership. They had, they knew why they were there. They trusted each other. They communicate. That's what won the championship. Yeah, Kawhi put it over the top. Absolutely. Like, you get a generational talent like that, and you put him into that kind of a foundation, and watch
it
what
wasn't
happens.
Overnight. For everybody listening
Right.
and watching, it was not overnight.
No,
Yeah.
if you were watching for the 5-6 years, really, since Masai got there, and they were so much fun to watch. They're still fun to watch. I mean, this year is maybe the least fun year to watch, but at the end of the day, that's great leadership. You take the New York Knicks as sort of the other example of that. You can't just take talented people, plunk them on a team, and expect them to win. It doesn't work that way.
So actually diving into that, so I always ask this question, right? So I'm going to ask you the same question, Seth. Why not just get a bunch of superstars into a team?
One thing that it's been years since I've read his book, but Phil Jackson and the work that he did, obviously, with the Bulls. You think of Scotty Bowman and some of the work that he did with the Red Wings and the Canadians. Some of these leaders or coaches that were able to manage these teams, but most of it comes back to, like, psychology, right? Like, it's managing egos, it's getting everybody bought in, it's accountability. It's, so you can have talent, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with talent, but if you don't have communication, if you don't have trust and respect amongst the group, and those dynamics aren't in place, it's real tough. And I don't think, and I've learned this in business too. You can have a team full of people with MBAs and all kinds of experience, done everything, seen everything. And I've been part of or led teams like that, and it backfires because a bunch of reasons, and most of it comes back to ego. Or the other thing is, like, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, if you have star players but they don't have room to play, right? They're sort of stuck on the second or third line, so to speak. They're frustrated, right? Like, let me go, let me do my thing. And it can get really restrictive if you have a whole bunch of people that all want to do stuff. So to me, like, team composition and making sure you have the right types of skills, and then room for them to go and not only perform but develop and grow is very important.
The one thing I'll add there also is a lot of managers, when they're building these teams, they love to hire great people, best experiences, which is why this problem happens, right? The one thing that also leaders should do, and they don't do enough, is evaluating their own skill set and the values of the company. Because the team you're bringing in might have the chemistry, which solves our earlier problem. But if your skill set and your leadership style does not match that of the team you're building, that's also going to backfire.
Totally. And know what your deficiencies are, and when you're in a leadership position,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times you can hire to balance that,
And that's
right?
why you should hire. You should be open and admit that, hey, I'm not good at this stuff. I need a team to build that.
100%.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I would say that we were very successful the last year, I'll just go back to the Bisons example. Adam came in, he played, 15 years of professional hockey and had experience and knowledge of how the game works on the ice and the X's and O's and all that stuff that I'm just never going to have. And that's okay. Like, he brought that element to it. I brought the business side, the building of the teams, the kind of all the administrative and
Amazing.
making sure all the T's were dotted and I's were crossed. So you got to find complementary skill sets. And often what I've found in leadership is less is more. And what I mean by that is people I've found want to have these big teams. Like, let's bring in all these successful people, and then we have all these great people. How can it not go well? But if you don't have clarity on what they're going to do, and what it is
Mm-hmm.
you want them to do, all of a sudden you got people stepping over each other, and it gets really challenging. And all of a sudden you're like unwinding and managing conflict all day instead of actually
Versus
going after the prize.
executing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
totally.
Yeah. It's focus on a few handful of priorities, right? And just go hard and role clarity.
Role clarity, I'm learning, is
Mm-hmm.
so important. And it's not just a job description. Like, a job description gets people in the door,
Yeah.
but now you're in there day to day. It's like, well, what do you want me to do?
And
And that can be tough. And I don't know that we spend enough time there.
also, one thing I would do is actually have an exercise set where whenever I brought somebody new on my team, I would say, here's a scenario. How would you now work with these four people? Where does your role start and end? Walk me through that example. That exercise, I'm telling you, nobody ever got it right. And that told me that there's not enough clarity in the role. But once you did that, it was like night and day.
I think it's a good way to approach an interview, and asking someone how they would approach something. You get so many interesting answers, but you
Yeah,
get a sense for how they think, and that's
absolutely.
more what I'm interested. I'm more interested in how you think than what you think or what you've done. I'd way rather have a person who I understand how they're going to approach something, um, and then kind of create the space for them to do that, than to have to
Yeah.
tell someone what to think all the time.
The other thing also, now that we're talking about analogies, is hiring the right attitude, because you can always teach the skills. You can always
Yeah.
train.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I'm curious for your take on it even as well. I think one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is, what are we hiring people for? And the reason I say that is, a lot of times the definitions that we're coming from are based on what good looks like today, right? How are we making sure that
Yeah.
we're hiring talent that's going to be successful tomorrow, 1, 2, 3 years from now? Because the world is changing so fast.
Yeah. Great problem right now. And I absolutely agree with you. I think most people hire for the present. Um, one thing that I used to do, and maybe it might help someone that's listening or watching, is I would always say, where does this company want to go in the next 3 years? And then I would also layer on the environment, right? So where is the industry going, and where are the competitors going? And if you can map out, just like you said, you want to pass the puck where the player is going to be, not where he is.
Yeah.
So you map out 3 years in advance. Where is the industry going to be? And you say, what kind of people do I need to hire today that will get me there? So you almost work backwards. The tough part is convincing your internal teams or leadership that this is who I want, because they don't see it that way. So if you can really get over the hump, they're saying, look, this is the stuff we got to invest in today. We need a bunch of data scientists, even though we have no AI algorithms running at all. But unless we hire them, we're not going to get there. That's the
Yeah.
type of thinking I think everybody needs to push for.
Totally. Totally. And I mean, COVID is just accelerating that as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think I've listened and heard a couple of things around, what would have maybe been 3, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, in terms of digitalization, is been
This
accelerated
year.
into like 6 months, into a year.
Yeah,
And it's going to be really interesting to see what our workforce landscape looks like, in 2022.
yeah, absolutely. On that note, I know a lot of student athletes this year didn't play in Canada. They're transitioning into the business world. You've applied sports in your career. You've applied them successfully on both sides. What advice would you have for these student athletes, Seth, on making the leap?
Yeah, it's so tough. I think I feel for, those kids who are heading into their last year
Yeah.
of whatever, college, university, junior, and not getting the opportunity to do that. But like we said earlier, nobody's going to wait around for the pity party. You just gotta get right with it and move forward. And it sucks, and it's not fair or whatever. But at the end of the day, the world's going to keep spinning, and you just got to kind of get in there and prepare yourself. For me, there's a couple of things that I think of, and one is building great habits when you're young. Don't wait till you're 33 like I did to start. In a lot of cases, if you're a student athlete, you've got these great habits already when it comes to fitness. Keep them going. It's real easy to sit on the couch and binge Netflix and start to sort of just blah. If you've got great personal discipline now, I can't stress enough how meaningful it will be to you when you become 30, 35, if you keep those habits going. And it'll spin off into business, right? Because one of the challenges I had that led me to kind of reevaluate my life, one day you look in the mirror, you're 310 pounds and you haven't worked out in 10 years, and you're like, you got to start from base camp. If you can avoid that, trust me, it'll pay dividends at work. It'll pay dividends in your personal life, having that something to anchor back to, and not having to start from scratch later in life, because it sucks and it's hard. And you can avoid a lot of that if you keep those habits. That's one thing, and I think it applies across the place. And the other interesting thing I think I'm finding, and because I was in the hockey world and I have a chance to talk to some kids. Actually, I'm wearing a hoodie right now. Shoot Your Shot, and this is made by a couple of boys, Parker Mackay and Ambrose Furcus, and they played junior hockey and baseball. And actually, Parker won 2 NCAA championships with Mini Duluth, and had a pro hockey career that was ended by a concussion. And so they're taking what they've learned in the business world, or not, sorry, in the sports world, applying it to business by starting their own lifestyle brand, clothing brand, and they're just kind of running with it. And I think it's interesting. There's just so many different ways that you can make a living or a career now. It's not just limited to, hey, I'm done sports, I gotta go to business, 9 to 5, or I gotta go get a trade. Like, there's so many ways that you can, especially if you had any sort of success and you have a bit of a brand built up, there's all kinds of ways you can leverage that. So I think it's an interesting time, and if you can stay positive and just kind of start to find your niche in the world, I think that's what I'd recommend.
And the only thing I'll add there is what Seth said in the beginning was 30 minutes in the morning and evening instead of commuting. Now, if you can spend those 30 minutes, 1 hour a day on Googling how to make money online, it'll pay dividends.
Totally.
Well, awesome. Well, hey, Seth, thanks so much for jumping on. This was amazing. I think a lot of great takeaways for executives, student athletes, whether hockey players, football players, or even just in general. So thanks so much for sharing all this stuff. Where can everyone learn and find your podcast? Please share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our podcast is thebizdojo.com. And, we're on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those places. And our goal is really to inspire other leaders, entrepreneurs, through the stories of people who've done it. So we have a wide variety of guests, ranging, we had a common guest, Mike Morale, who came on and talked about starting.
To McMaster Marauder.
He was a great guest, and came and talked about starting up the CEBL, which is one of those things where from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think that it was started over breakfast, and really very much a startup in nature. And so getting behind the scenes on things like that, we've had business coaches, tarot card readers, athletes, just a whole bunch of leaders. And really that's part of what we're trying to do, is humanize leadership, showcase it across all the different spectrums, and just give people some inspiration to take that next step in their life.
That's so important. That's such a great topic. I think leadership has to be redefined, especially in this new age post-pandemic. So great work. Keep it up, Seth. And thanks again for jumping on. So great to have you on.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. Team, remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend, and visit tambourinevango.com for a ton of free content and exercises.